Welcome, friends. My name is Tamara with Love in a Big World, and this is our LBW Educate You podcast. My guest today is my friend Alicia Haywood with I Speak Media and many other things. Alicia, welcome. We're so happy to have you today.
Thank you, Tamara. It's always a pleasure to be connected to you.
Well, will you give our listeners a bit of information about who you are and what you're up to at this time?
I always start by saying, I'm a producer in my real life. I feel like I have to lead with that because that's been such a large portion of my life working in the professional media industry. It's been 27 years. So let me just get that out of the way. Yeah, it's been 27 years of me working in the industry. So I'm a producer. And about 13 years ago, I realized that I'm actually an educator at heart. Found myself thrown in front of a classroom full of students and discovered that they are, in fact, my favorite audience. And I just had no idea. And I have since tried to spend some time getting closer to having the educator side of my life take the lead and have the producer side of my life kind of take the back burner for a bit. So I am in West Palm Beach, Florida, and I'm new to this area of the country. I started in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, before moving to Atlanta. And from Atlanta, I moved to Los Angeles. And from Los Angeles, I moved to Chicago. And it was always work, always something production, media related that motivated those relocations. And then when I had made a decision to try to begin the downshift from such intense production all the time into more human level educator kind of lifestyle, I decided to pack up my Chicago life and head south, and had made a decision that I wanted to really put some energy behind bringing the producer and educator sides of me together. And that's how I Speak Media actually came about. The I Speak Media Foundation is my nonprofit organization, as you know, that I use as a platform for my work in media literacy education. So, that's exactly where somebody like me, that's where I need to be, right? The actual intersection of media and education is media literacy. So I started packing up my life in Chicago and moved. I was on my way to Florida, had a little detour in Columbia, Missouri, where I spent 18 months teaching for the School of Journalism, the Missouri School of Journalism, before I ultimately made it down here to Florida. And here I am.
Awesome. You have had quite a journey. So
I have, my friend.
Yeah, for those who don't know, tell us what media literacy is.
That's my favorite question. Let me just start the answer with that. That's my favorite question. What is media literacy? And it's a fair question because I think there are lots of different interpretations of media literacy, and I think that it's not immediately clear to someone who decides to look up media literacy. It's not immediately clear what it means. And I always start by saying at the very foundation, media literacy is just about understanding your relationship with media. It's about understanding that we are immersed in a heavily mediated culture. And it is not a replacement of our understanding of literacy or what we have come to know about what it means to be literate, what it means to be functional, intellectually functional in a text-based kind of context. But it's an expansion of that definition. Media literacy it asks us to open up our minds enough to acknowledge that our world is different, our culture is different, and there are new forms of media in play that weren't on the radar, that weren't a part of our lives 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago now. And so while literacy used to mean, well, you need to know how to read. You need to know how to read text. You need to know how to read print signs. You need to know how to write. That's how you function as an independent citizen. You know how to navigate information that way. So now just bring all of these new forms of media to that definition. It's the same concept. We still need to know how to read. We still need to know how to write, but it's more than just print. We need to know how to read visual media and audio based media, just as we need to know how to read and write print-based media. Same concept.
Thank you for that.
More skills. Mm-hmm.
Right, because I know in education we define literacy as reading, writing, and speaking, and that definition has broadened over the years to include the speaking part, right? But when you're talking about media literacy, let's break down what are you considering to be media?
Also a great question. So what's interesting to me, Tamara, is that when I am in conversation with the babies, with the young people, which to me is, anybody under 40, they always say, they say, when I say media to them, they think social media, right? But let's be clear here. Media applies to any medium of communication. So, and that's particularly applied to, electronic forms of communication. Anything that is between you and the message creator and the message reaching you itself, like whatever the mode of transport or translation is for that message, this is what I'm referring to when I say media. It could be a book, right, that makes its way from the author to the reader. It could be a podcast, right? It could be television, of course, film, what we hear on the radio. It could be billboards. It could be newspapers, magazines. They do still exist, my friends. They do. And it could even be, let's break it all the way down to the logos that are a part of our clothing, or you can find logos anywhere, but I say that with young people because I get them to recognize that this a symbol that represents a company and or brand, that's a message. That symbol becomes a message, right? And so that now, and the way that message is delivered to you is maybe it's on a T-shirt, maybe it's on a cap, a bag, whatever it is. That counts. That counts because now you're a billboard, because you're now part of the message delivery. But the point really is that there's been an explosion of media formats in our culture, and it all counts. It all counts. It all needs to be part of the conversation.
That's good. I'm thinking we pay to actually be a human billboard, right? We pay big money for that. Crazy.
Let me just quickly interject. And sometimes it's not even a brand that we see, but I think about these young women, just as one very quick example. I think about these young women who are, they're wearing these eyelashes now that, they're so long and so pronounced. I feel like they enter the room before the actual person, who's wearing them enters the room. or, and the nails and the hair, and that, like, it's gone so far beyond just wearing logos. We're now walking billboards for these beauty and cosmetic brands that, entice us to want to wear whatever it is they're selling. So I mean, in that regard, I would almost say the human becomes the medium, but that's a larger conversation. But
so what you're talking about, Alicia, is how to teach young people to decode the messages that they're bombarded with. Is that part of what you're saying?
You know what? Yes, it is part of it. And a lot of media literacy approaches, most all of them, refer to media deconstruction, right? Some would say, but it is an exercise in decoding. But I start before that and say, before we even get to breaking down the components of a media text, and a media text can be anything. It could be any, format of media. I say text, but that could apply to a movie. Could be a media text, as our example. Mm-hmm. But it's not just a matter of knowing how to break that down. We have to start with our awareness. Mm-hmm. I have found that the most effective media literacy classes or lessons or discussions have really revolved around getting students or the young people in the room, whoever's listening, to recognize the media that's in their lives. That's where the conversation needs to start. I have media literacy colleagues who are firm believers of, you teach media literacy by putting a camera in a student's hands and letting them go produce something. Yeah, I don't think that's true. I think that could be part of it eventually, because there is a certain degree of internalization of the lesson that comes from you being on the content creator side of media. But a lot of the conversation comes from the consumer side, comes from the position of, hey, this is in front of us. Where did it come from? What does it mean? It's all of it is necessary, but you can't get there. You can't get to a point of sustained understanding or comprehension or applicability unless you address the way that we think. And so this is why I say yes to decoding, yes to deconstruction. But let's start with just deconstructing the media that you are carrying right now, or identifying it, or just recognizing that, hey, we're in this room. Maybe there's music on in the room. Maybe there's screens up above. Let's just get present and let's start to detach ourselves from being so immersed. Let's just try to come out of it enough to recognize that this is actually the context within which we are trying to make our way. From there, we can then grow into conversation about, what are the components of this? And where we can start to ask some really pointed questions about it. Where did this originate? There is a person behind everything, right? There is a human behind every media text. Who is the person behind it? Who wrote it? Who is the author here? Who produced it? Who was the team that put this together? What do I know about those people? Aside from the message that they wanted me they wanted to put in front of me. Let me go around the message for a minute. Let me take a look at them. What do I know about these people? What do I know about their values? What do I know about their points of view? And then how do I calculate how their points of view are making it into the message that they're putting in front of me? Mm-hmm. What actually is getting my attention? What's motivating me to, look up and listen? And why? Just kind of getting ourselves to recognize what we're attracted to. What are the patterns there? And then you could go into questions about, why is this here? Okay, I addressed the who, I addressed the what, but why is this here? Why was this message put together? Why did it come through this particular distribution channel the way it did? Why is the language here? Why are the images here? Why are the components, the elements that make up this message? Why do they seem like they are, being directed at me personally? Why is that? What am I hearing? What am I recognizing here? So those are the kinds of things that you can get to at some point. Yes. A lot of people may think, no, you need to start there, but I come back to sustained, effective media literacy conversation needs to really be at the awareness level.
That's good. I'm thinking about how so much of what you're describing is about teaching kids critical thinking skills.
That's exactly what it is.
To mindfulness and critical thinking. So it's not just I'm in mindfulness or I'm constantly bombarded by these messages in whatever format they're coming to me, whether it's on the screen in my living room or on my phone that I'm carrying in my backpack. But it's okay, let's stop and think, what am I engaged with?
Right.
And
let's first recognize that I am engaged in something. Let's recognize that I am connected to something. Let's recognize that that I'm being communicated with. Whether or not I initiate the communication, it's happening. So it starts there. Yes.
And I think that mindfulness and that critical thinking then helps us to understand the influence that those messages are having on us. And I know you and I've talked for like a couple years, just so people know, like we're friends, we work together on new projects, and we're big fans of each other's work. So one of the things that we always come back to is this intersection between media literacy and social emotional learning, right? Like how, and just so those who are listening understand, we define social emotional learning as helping kids identify what's going on in their heads and in their hearts so they can use their hands to build up and not tear down. So recognizing what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and then what they do as motivated by those thoughts and feelings. So what do you see as the intersection between social and emotional learning and media literacy?
Identity. In one word, frankly, it's identity. And recognizing where an individual's identity construction comes from within, or their own shaping, versus identity construction that may be happening from external elements or external motivators. I feel like the kinds of concepts that we are taught through social emotional lessons gets us to think about being human first.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Isn't that it at its most at its foundation. Let's just think about being human, not consumer, but human.
Mm-hmm.
And so the blending of media literacy with SEL efforts really comes down to getting people to think about who they are minus the media.
Mm-hmm.
Who are they?
Mm-hmm.
What sorts of ideas are they coming up with on their own? What sorts of values are they establishing in and around their life without necessarily pulling them from programming that they may be, engaged in? But it's that holistic approach to building a healthy human. You can't really address what we think, the way we think, or how we know what we know, how we get information. We can't address that without bringing media into that part of the conversation. And I come back to the most interesting level of discussion is always at that point, when it's directed at a point of the core of our humanity, really. Like, this is what matters. It's not so much what am I being entertained by, or what am I being persuaded to go and buy, or what side of the political aisle or spectrum am I feeling obliged to today? It's kind of peeling away those layers and getting down to removing the media voice from how you think about who you are. Mm-hmm. And how you move around the world, how you move around other people, how you, yeah.
And so doesn't that come back to, like, if you're peeling away those layers, I'm thinking about my kids. I mean, you and I have talked about my kids. So I've got a 22-year-old, an 18-year-old, and a 15-year-old whose lives are completely immersed in all types of media. I would say my boys, it's rap music and gaming. For my daughter, it's TikTok, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. But if they would peel back the layers, or even me, and instead of being shaped by, I get to choose what I partake of. Do you know what I mean? Like,
sure.
It's light.
I know exactly. Yes. That's what we're saying here.
Yeah, I like jazz. That's the music. So I'm going to make the choice rather than have it forced on me. Do you know what I mean?
Sure. I do know what you mean. And it's also a matter of thinking through how the media that you are engaged with is getting responses out of you. What is it making you think or do or feel or believe? And recognizing that the starting point really should be internal. And it should be from a context that is that's trusted and that to be. So I would take it from media to immediate family or the community or village around you. It doesn't always have to come through the media. Now, that said, let me also just make clear that by no means is proper media literacy education a matter of tearing down media itself. It's not about that. It's especially the way that I come at it. this is a part of our life and culture. So we should establish how to be with it, how to live this life, how to live this mediated life in a healthy way. That's really the bottom line. There is a healthy way to go about it. And, whether it's games and social media or music that, your babies are into. So what's the conversation from mom to the kids, really, or with the kids, about what's attracting their attention and why?
So what do you think is missing? I mean, considering what we've talked about with media literacy, considering what we've mentioned regarding social emotional learning, what do you think is missing right now in the classrooms? Because I'll say, like, my boys in particular, I would say it's much harder for them to stay engaged in class because they're used to all this stimulation all the time. And so to think that they're going to sit for a 50-minute class and listen to a lecture from a math teacher who's like pushing 60, they're just like, like their first question is, what does this have to do with real life? That's always their
of course.
So what do you think is missing, or what gaps do you see? Where do you think media literacy, SEL, identity development, where do you think that can play to make school come alive for kids and really for them to the world?
Let me start my answer with an acknowledgement of the fact that I have never been an educator who has lived in the K-12 space. So from my position as an educator, it's always been, predominantly been through higher education. So I've got the college-age students, traditional and non-traditional for sure. But my exposure with the adolescents has primarily come through, I'm getting to them in an after-school program or a community-based organization or at the library or, somewhere outside of that 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. school-based space where they know classrooms. Now, that said, all of my classmates, I didn't mention before that I'm also pursuing my PhD right now in curriculum and instruction. All of my classmates are in the K-12 space. They're all teachers. And so a lot of my observations about what's missing come from, what I'm getting, what I'm gathering, what I'm researching, and what I'm hearing from them. But it very much appears to be teachers themselves need to be educated in media literacy, right? So they need to get to the point where they are comfortable with the concept and the way to introduce it into the way they teach, bring it into the environment with their students. They need to feel comfortable with that. And I don't believe that as a country we've gotten to that space yet. It's happening in pockets, state by state, and slowly, but that's a big part of what's missing. We don't have a generation of people who have made it through media literacy education and are now old enough to be the teachers to then, be the ones to teach their kids. We haven't made it there yet. So that's one thing that's missing. But then for those who are there, those who may be making attempts with media literacy education in their existing courses, we need more of that, right? Like, we need more math teachers to understand that math lessons can be very beautifully supplemented with and through discussions of media and or examples of media, just to make it relevant. My goodness, yes. I learned, I think I recognized, I'm the kind of educator I've learned who I need to read the room. And that's the producer influencing the educator in me. I'm not going to show up with a speech so much, but I am going to show up with enough of an outline of a plan. But I need to read I need to know who my students are. I need to know what they're into. And I've always said, the first student in the room gets to choose our music for the day. There's always going to be music in the background, right? Because they are a multitasking generation, or a couple generations into it now. And so the room can't be quiet. Let's make it comfortable. Let's make it, they're used to being in media saturated environments. So let's just at least start there. But that's me. I come from a media background. And so I try to find ways to, and a lot of what I have taught is media related, whether it's journalism or writing for the screen or producing or whatever. So it's a natural extension for me, but for the chemistry teacher, or, history teacher, it does take a little more, planning and or coordination to get to the point where you're comfortable structuring your classes in such a way that you acknowledge that the way you learned is not the way your students are able to learn. And so, maybe that's part of what's missing, but that comes back to the teacher preparation, teacher education, getting the teachers up to speed about media literacy and what it's about, and not to be afraid of it. I've been reading that one of the reasons that, I'm also on the board. I didn't say this either. It's hard to do a short bio. Let me just say that. But I didn't say that I'm on the board of media literacy now.
Yeah.
I do a lot. But I'm on the board of Media Literacy Now, which is an organization that is all about legislation. It's policy, making sure that we get policy in place in every state and U.S. territory so that media literacy becomes required in schools and in the curriculum. Here in Florida, I learned that media literacy has been part of legislation here since, I think, 2007.
Wow.
But right. Wow. But when I talk to people down here, I still have to introduce it as though nobody's heard of it. So something is disconnected.
Right. That sounds very
But does it really?
Oh yeah, social emotional learning, character education, that was all part of legislation for a long time. I mean, probably 10 to 20 years before it became what it is today, which is one of the hottest topics in education.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why, but it can be an unfunded mandate for a while before people just have this aha moment of like, oh, our kids need this. So I'm not sure what it will take. The pandemic has definitely escalated the need for social emotional learning in schools. It was on the rise for 3 to 5 years prior to that, but I've been in this work for over 25 years.
Yeah.
And then it's this all of a sudden, boom. Yeah.
It's amazing how what's needed moves so slowly. It's really amazing. But what I wanted to mention, and as the last point in relation to what's missing, is that what I've been reading a lot in relation to teachers is that there's a fear. There's an underlying fear with them about creating a classroom environment that is media friendly, and perhaps losing control of it to the point where the students know more about the media or what's being presented or how it's being presented than the teachers, or the teachers being afraid of being in the position of being vulnerable or needing help or not knowing how to navigate a particular type of media or device or something. They're afraid of that. And that's a really sad commentary for me, to just imagine that we're letting fear get in the way of our students get what they need. That's heartbreaking for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that we're on the cusp of a potential revolution in education.
You do.
I do. I think that we have a choice whether or not we're going to embrace it or not. But we can choose to put the needs of our students first and address those needs in ways that are relevant to them, i.e., media.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can choose just to go back to business as usual, like some people are
Yeah.
talking about now, well,
Yeah.
I was going to say post pandemic, but we're not nearly through this yet, especially here in the
Right.
South. But there's such a push to get back to school in person. But in-person learning doesn't have to mean that the teacher is the font of all knowledge and wisdom. I think our
It should have never meant that. Good
I
grief.
know. I think it really needs to be
Mm-hmm.
facilitators. We're coaches. We're helping the kids along in their discovery process, you know?
You know what's fascinating to me is that I stumbled into this education thing. It was sort of thrown in front of a classroom. I just discovered that, oh yeah, I love it here. This is great. There are things that I do naturally. Just as an open-hearted person, I think, who is genuinely interested in the success of young people. I start with, listen, you're bringing as much to this as I'm bringing. So we're going to learn from each other. And that's from day one. Yeah. So it's really astonishing to me that there are people who are being trained to become teachers, who are in the classroom spaces, who are in the K-12 system, who may not necessarily have the best interest of the students in mind. And I definitely would like to believe that that's more the exception and not the rule. But
right. I think that in summary, I think what you identified is we can either teach and lead out of fear, or we can teach and lead out of love. And if we're teaching and leading out of fear, then we're going to attempt to control. And if we're teaching and leading out of love, then we're going to promote. And it's a heart difference, it's a philosophical difference in the approach. So yeah. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for caring for kids the way you do, and for helping to connect the dots between what's going on out of the classroom with what's happening in the classroom, because I think that's really the only way we're going to continue to keep them engaged. And that's not only that's for the well-being of our world.
Yeah. And we have to be allies in this, we all have to, as adults, we just have to, and those who are charged with raising and being influences in the lives of these young people, we have to be on the same page about that. But thank you, Tamara. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you, friends, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.